I'd now like to introduce our first panel. Daniel Levy is here. Very good. I've just noticed him. Daniel will be well known to many of you. He's the president of the US Middle East Project, and he's an articulate and incisive voice, respected in many quarters, including at the UN Security Council, which he has been invited to address about this conflict. Nour Odeh, our other main speaker from Palestine, is a political analyst and activist from Ramallah, who was once Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad's spokesperson. She is a founding member of the Palestinian Democratic National Assembly, a relatively new party. Daniel will speak first, then Nour. After she finishes, they will have a short discussion between themselves, and then we'll open up to audience questions. Please welcome them to the stage. The microphones are on. Daniel, you want to come on? They'll speak from here. Yeah. Okay, but we'll do Q&A from now. Okay. Daniel, maybe you'd like to come up here first. Speak from here.
Do I need to fix anything to myself, or I'm good?
Great.
Okay, so first of all, thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. Thank you, Sir Vincent and Adam and Deanna and Phyllis for putting this together and for giving me the opportunity just to spend a bit of the time with you. Let me try and run through a few. Let me try and run through a few things quite briefly. And cover the ground that I can. And I want to start with what is going on at the moment in terms of, I think there's been some confusion since President Biden gave a speech on Friday. You have a strange statement put out now by the White House, signed by a number of countries, mostly those that have nationals or dual nationals being held in Gaza, which kind of speaks to, I'm afraid, the absurdity, and absurdity is probably a generous word for criminality, of the way that the US and the West have managed affairs in the last months. You have a statement that they've just put out. The first paragraph calls on Hamas to accept the proposal, and the second paragraph calls on Israel and Hamas. And I'm someone who believes there is absolutely a place in diplomacy for constructive ambiguity, and that there is also something called duplicity and dishonesty. And I think we've crossed that line. So it was meaningful, actually. This was a tool that the Americans had at their disposal, potentially for the last months, to actually put a plan on the table. That was potentially significant, and drawing a clear linkage to a permanent ceasefire, saying this wasn't a 6-week hiatus. This was the on-ramp to a permanent ceasefire. That, if that were to happen, then that was the bump we had to overcome for these last several months. However, it was totally predictable that the Israeli response would be yes to the bits we like and no to the bits we don't like. And therefore, within hours, the Prime Minister had clarified that Israel intends to continue with the war. His coalition partners did the same later on Saturday night, once the Jewish Sabbath had gone out, as did many of his Likud lawmakers. And so the question was, what would America do? Except if you were asking that question, you haven't been paying attention for the last months, because we knew what the answer was. And they caved in and walked it back. And basically said, as it became more evident that the problem here was with Jerusalem West, we saw the US doubling down on this idea that the only people who had to give an answer was Hamas. And it's not, I don't believe that they could have given ironclad guarantees, but they could have created maximum plausibility that phase one, which would have also seen the release of the Israeli hostages, would have led to a permanent ceasefire. In the face of Netanyahu saying the opposite. And if they didn't do that, then it was clear what the outcome would be, which is where we are now, which feels very much like we're already back in the comfort zone of we can all just blame Hamas, and the death, destruction, daily mass civilian killing events can continue. And that is a terrible place to be. And I think at every fork in the road where the choice was, does one have a sustained standoff with a recalcitrant Israeli leadership, or does one default to letting them off the hook? The choice has been the latter. And the latter is what has gotten us here. And if you want almost an image that captures everything, for me, it's that seaport in Gaza. There are land crossings. You can get everything you need in through the land crossings. But if you weren't prepared to use your leverage to force open the land crossings, then you drop food on Palestinians, sometimes causing fatalities because it's the worst way possible of delivering that aid. And then in your State of the Union address, you come up with this fantastical announcement about a seaport that eventually collapses into the ocean. And that's the image. And I'm not speaking in the United States. So why do I reference this? Because I also think that the US does not operate in a vacuum. And I'm not saying this would have been decisive, but I think it would have, and it still matters. What is the determination made by the UK government in terms of its weapons sales and transfers to Israel? And what is that legal advice? When does that stop? And how do we respond to the ICC and the ICJ? Like I say, I don't think that sways things, but it creates part of the environment in which the US administration operates. So that sadly is my understanding of where we are. I was asked to give a little bit of a sketch of what the dynamics are on the Israeli side. And I think it's rather transparent, actually. What you have inside the governing coalition, you have two main trends. One, and I also think that there's a terrible tendency to suffer from Bibiitis, as if the only problem over there is this one chap, and if he goes, it will all be okay. I also, by the way, think that part of the failing in the political strategy has been to pretend that Hamas do not have considerations and equities and constituency and collective decision-making. I think the way it's portrayed is as if there's this one guy in a tunnel in their imaginations, perhaps stroking a white cat. And that's how decisions, and you don't have to give Hamas a reason to continue to go along, even with ambiguity. But going back to the Israeli side. So within that coalition, the Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and much of the Likud, and that's important to acknowledge, much of the Likud have openly called for further ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the displacement of the population in Gaza, even though the real prize is the West Bank in that respect, and the resettling of Gaza. One position. The position that, and then it's a spectrum rather than a kind of binary. The position of Netanyahu has been, well, not resettlement, and even though ministries in my own government did put forward papers about plans to relocate Palestinians in Gaza across the border into the Sinai, that's not what I'm for. I'm just for reoccupation. The reestablishment of a military occupation that would continue. He has used the words de-radicalization. That has to happen first. Just to clarify, he didn't mean about his own society. He was talking about Gaza when he used the term de-radicalization. So that's those positions. But then this matters. The alternative position offered, and by the way, if you haven't seen it, Netanyahu's office did put out a plan for Gaza afterwards. And the best write-up of this, I know people are familiar with Adam Tooze, professor at Columbia now. He's written about the poly crisis. In his Substack, there's an amazing write-up of that. So the third position, though, which is kind of the Gantz-Lapid, is let's have an imaginary Palestinian force or the Palestinian Authority that can somehow come in on the back of Israeli tanks and go back to the pre-October 7th status quo ante. And for me, the key message is October 7th was a violation of international law. What Israel has done in response in Gaza is a violation of international law. What was happening every day from October 6th and backwards for decades in denying Palestinians their freedom and their rights was a violation of international law. And the way forward cannot be to go back to that. And I say that because I think the joint effort of the United States trying to bring in Arab partners for that, trying to bring in and succeeding European partners, and this is the UK position as I understand it, and the supposed moderate camp in Israel, and Nour, I'm sure, will touch on Palestinian politics, the Palestinian Authority, deeply discredited, is to try and coalesce around returning to a Potemkin peace process, a make-believe in which we actually go back and continue with a reality of apartheid. I say that because there are things that a UK government of whatever colouring can do that feed into that, and there are things they can do that challenge that. Recognition of Palestine can do either. It's actually neutral, I think, in that respect. Israel may scream and shout and make a brouhaha about it, but actually it's only meaningful if the next step is to say what we just recognized is occupied, and now what do we do in response to that? What is our relationship with I don't believe there is a settler economy and an Israeli economy, by the way. But if you want to go down that route as a way of tying people up in knots, and you can play that game, then you say, do we ban settlement products? How do we make sure that Israel is not circumventing that? What's our position in legal international fora? So the thought I would share by way of closing is the building blocks to not just get past the most crucial first point, and the most crucial first point is to end the horrors that are occurring every moment of every day to Palestinians in Gaza. To get beyond that, we need to think about four things. One, which I won't go into, is Palestinians need a national liberation movement that has a strategy that can challenge the status quo, and we don't have that. Number two, if Israel can continue to act with impunity and not be held accountable, if the cost-benefit calculation of any Israeli leader is that taking on the hardliners, which go deep, deep into society and the establishment and the political class, is very costly, but not doing so means more goodies, means a roadmap 2030 to improve bilateral relations with the UK, which is what the government here did, means the Americans giving the Israelis the visa waiver during the Ben-Gvir-Smotrich government. If it's cost-free to carry on, and you get normalization with Arab states thrown into the happy pie, then don't be surprised if things keep going in that direction. Only, I'm not saying Israelis can be bludgeoned and sanctioned into a full change of everything. But if you want minds to be focused, and if you want the hard questions to even be asked, let alone answered in ways that we'd like them to be answered, then you have to change the incentive structure, because we could not, I firmly believe this, we could not have gotten to where we are without this layer after layer after layer of impunity, because it allowed Israelis to not see Palestinians. Palestinians were not on the agenda. And when you don't see people, it's so much easier to dehumanize people. And we couldn't have got where we are today without that. So that's the second thing. 3 and 4 will be one sentence each. 3, this cannot be an American monopoly. We have to welcome a different set of actors. And I hope a new UK government would think long and hard about those, in particular in the global majority countries, the global South, who have stepped out, who have actually proven that they are more willing to challenge the status quo than others. And finally, what Andrew referred to at the end. All of this plays out in our domestic politics. That's understandable. That's natural. It cannot play out in the silencing, criminalizing, culture war ways, which also pit one community against another. I think it's a strategic misstep of very significant proportions that the Jewish community, in its establishment guise, has gone along with that, has volunteered to be a battering ram with other communities in this country. That is not how you build a more tolerant society in which Jewish and other communities can flourish. And if everything is anti-Semitism, if you are so expansive in your definition and so unseriousness and so willing to conflate, then nothing is anti-Semitism. People won't take it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. You speak with great authority, and you've got our conference off to a great start. Let me now invite Nour to come up to the podium to tell us her perspective from Ramallah.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. And I want to start with a personal note. I am a Palestinian living in Ramallah. I'm also a diaspora Palestinian who was born in Damascus. And I have had the privilege of living and leaving a piece of my heart in Gaza. So I bring to you all of that with me as a consequence of the occupation and the impunity that we've been talking about. What is the mood in the West Bank? Let me tell you that the mood in the West Bank is everything that Gaza is experiencing, minus the destruction and the bloodshed. We are collectively traumatized. We are in agony. And I think we collectively suffer from survivor's guilt. We wake up every day fearing to hold the phone, fearing to receive news of losing loved ones or friends or colleagues, or just simply of seeing more scenes of bloodshed that we are helpless to stop. There's also that sense of abandonment where you feel that despite everything, and those of us, people like me who have had a career in communicating, right, in different languages, at some point in our lives, we all believed that it was a matter of information, that if people just knew what was happening, if there was internet and social media during the Nakba, it couldn't have possibly happened. But the past 8 months prove that it would have, and that there would have been cheerleaders for that Nakba, for that collective and systematic effort to erase an entire people. And there would have been droves and droves of politicians who would swear that none of this was happening, that your eyes are mistaken, that children are not dying. And there would have been people like Nikki Haley signing off on bombs, cheering Israel on and telling them to finish them off. But maybe what social media has done and where we are now, and this is where hope comes in, is why we also see that gap between where governments and the political establishment in the West is and how disconnected it is from the general public and from people who make an effort that we really value and appreciate. And it's so important for me to convey that, because it is the one breath of fresh air that we get when we see people marching, when we see people taking a stand, knowing how costly it is. So thank you before everything else. In the West Bank, a secret war is happening, a war that is overshadowed by everything that's happening in Gaza. Entire communities are being displaced. And all the tactics that Israel has been able to normalize in Gaza are being brought to the West Bank. So when you hear of incursions in the West Bank, know that the first thing that Israeli soldiers do is block the entrances to hospitals, is plow the streets and damage the infrastructure, is destroy homes indiscriminately, and detain thousands of Palestinians, including over 80 journalists, 52 of whom remain in Israeli imprisonment. That's not counting the thousands who have been forcibly disappeared from Gaza. So there is, of course, no comparison in the level of destruction, but that reality of pain is common between the Palestinians. Everybody in the West Bank understands that they're next. That is the conviction. That is the reality that they feel. Aside from losing loved ones and not having a moment to grieve, because for 8 months, we haven't been able to take a breath. And we don't have the luxury to break down, because you need to keep moving forward and you need to keep thinking about what will happen next, knowing that nobody will come to the rescue, not even your own government. When it comes to the discussion of the day after, I think it's very emblematic of how we got here, of the idea that Palestinian agency is a gift that can be given to certain token good Palestinians, right? That we as a people who are predominantly young and extremely educated and very opinionated, that we do not have what it takes to decide for ourselves who should have the privilege of leading our nation to freedom. So ever since the Hamas takeover of Gaza, we have had everybody decide what will come of us and discuss who will lead us except us, right? And the only question we get is, who do you think can do it? Well, why don't we put it up to the test? The ballot box usually does that. But there's a risk. We don't know who's going to win. Well, isn't that how elections supposed to work? We've been denied that. I was a candidate in elections that never happened in 2021. And they didn't happen, not because we couldn't hold them, but because nobody in the West wanted them to happen. The Europeans didn't send the observers. The diplomats were very apprehensive. They were almost certain we were going to make the wrong choice. We weren't going to pick their guys. They were right. But then we were denied that chance. And what that did is allow Palestinian politics to completely disintegrate. And what it did is lock us as a people, not just in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, including Jerusalem, but every Palestinian, everywhere in the world. They have locked us in a situation where we are hostage to a divided and dysfunctional and paralyzed political system where there is no discussion. because we are not deciding, right? There are a million vetoes on what can happen in Palestine. Who can participate in our political life? Who can run for elections? What is your agenda? Nobody asks us about the domestic agenda. Where do we stand on gender equality? Where do we stand on the economy? Where do we stand on education? The only thing we're asked is, where do we stand on Israel, our occupier, our oppressor? The only right answer, as far as Palestinians are concerned, is we oppose the occupation, right? We want to break free. We want to be let go. But that is not the answer that everybody else is looking for. They want the Palestinian who can ensure the security of their occupier, who can play the game, the rigged game, as it has been for the past 3 decades. A dysfunctional, humiliating game that has not served the Palestinian cause and, quite frankly, has not served international law. Fast forward to 2023, we have a situation where Israel is single-handedly unraveling the international system, courtesy of Western powers who are willing to sacrifice that system, to sacrifice those standards that they claim apply to everybody in order to maintain Israeli exceptionalism. And by extension, in order to maintain a life where Palestinians will be perpetually under Israel's boot. That is a dead-end reality Palestinians cannot and will not endure or tolerate. But how do we get out of there? How do we get out of this trap while battered and bleeding and struggling to just survive? Because I'll tell you that in the past 8 months, we also learned that there are a lot of things that are worse than dying. You can still be breathing while being dead inside, while having nothing left in you to fight for. That is the most dangerous state of living one can have. So how do we do it? We count on you to pressure your governments, hopefully a new government in the UK, to take a respectable position, to stand apart from the cowboy politics of Washington, to make sense, to be consistent. I'm not even as ambitious as saying to be pro-Palestine. Just be consistent. If these rules and laws and standards are to continue being applicable to everybody, as they were so quickly and efficiently applied to Russia, then they must apply to everybody. Then otherwise, what is happening in Gaza will become the new norm, like it or not. And nobody can say otherwise. I would dare them. And I think that fear, that knowledge that what is happening today threatens everybody is the reason why you have an unprecedented historic number of countries joining South Africa's case against Israel for genocide. And the last of them was Spain. Because it's not just about what Israel is doing, and it's not just about those who are enabling it. It's about what will happen later, what will happen to others, and what kind of crazy world we're giving to our children. It's not enough that our environment is threatened. It's not enough that we have a ton of things that we're giving to our children, but we're also now giving them a world where nothing, absolutely nothing makes sense. And I think that explains in many ways why young people have taken charge, why they understand that Palestine matters, not just to Palestinians, not just to those who share heritage, but it should matter to everybody. Because it is a litmus test. Because it is a product of political failure, willful political failure. We were put under the bus 75 years ago. We were sacrificed 75 years ago. And ever since then, and all the promises and all the mirages that were marketed as horizons for us, they were not meant to deliver us to freedom. They were meant to maintain the status quo of Israeli supremacy, of Israeli impunity, and of Palestinians just playing along, waiting for that carrot that never comes. And I'm here to tell you that that formula is untenable. That this genocide means that all attempts to look for another token Palestinian will not work. They may end up causing civil war in Palestine, but they will not result in a functional government. Because somebody has to pay for what has happened to us, not just Israel. Somebody needs to be accountable. And I don't want my government to be thinking more about appeasing London and Washington and Brussels and changing the curriculum that my children learn in order to appease some white supremacist in Brussels, in order to secure the measly salaries of civil servants. That is not an equation that I want to live with. And I'm the moderate. So where are we now in Palestinian politics? Can this government survive? I'm not sure. I think it's on life support. It's a very comfortable setting for those who want to do nothing. Keep a Palestinian government we can talk to when it pleases us, but can deliver nothing unless we give it to it. That is untenable. It is dangerous. And it's a formula for disaster. Palestinian agency is not something that should be given to Palestinians. It's not something it's not a gift. It is a right. But in order for us to exercise it, we have to have that space. And we have to have all the players participate. Those that I like and those that I don't. That is the very definition of democracy. I want all of them, Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Fatah and everybody. They need to be held accountable. And the only way to do that is for them to participate in political life and be accountable. And if we can put up with Ben Gvir, if we can put up with Smotrich, then by God, put up with our people, okay? Let us hold them accountable. Because otherwise, the option that we're being given is either civil war, a fractured, paralyzed political system where there's no horizon for participation for women or men, and thus endless occupation. It is untenable. Thank you.
Nour, I think I can say from the bottom of my heart, people were listening, waiting on every word of yours. Thank you for being here. Thank you for speaking so honestly and with such courage about what needs to be done here. I think from the nodding of heads that I saw and the attention, there's little disagreement over the analysis of what's gone wrong. What should be done? What should be done now? You started to identify some of the things, the need for Palestinian elections, the need for genuine Palestinian agency, not outsiders picking and choosing their favorite leaders. Is that going to be accepted by the international community? It's the question that you're raising. And there are some serious doubts about whether that will be the case based on the past record. But what needs to happen now, immediately, because elections aren't going to happen this year. With the destruction in Gaza, it's going to need some time. What should happen once the fighting stops in Gaza? What's your idea about what should be done to be able to ensure that there's a transition from this disaster to something better?
Well, in Palestinian political tradition, we have something that is loosely defined as consensus, whereby the political actors agree on how to move forward. And I think that is possible without the vetoes hovering over everybody's head, to using that tradition to form a body that can manage the mammoth task of reconstructing Gaza, of healing, and of reunifying the Palestinian political system, right, between the West Bank and Gaza. And that body should be in charge of preparing for elections when they are practical and possible. And I agree with you, it would take some time. But without Palestinians knowing that this body that is taking charge of that period is the product of consensus, it will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for it to have legitimacy and for it to have a practical ability to be in Gaza and to work. There is a tendency, especially in Washington, to talk about Hamas as if it's only relevant for ceasefire, right? So we'll talk to them, we'll get the captives out, and then we'll annihilate them, and they'll be happy with that, right? They'll be okay with that. Well, I mean, it's nonsensical. I don't want to say idiotic, but here it is. That's not how it's going to work, right? And so that kind of consensus, I think, would help give us some hope that there would be a way forward for this. But a PA that comes in spite of everything that has happened is not going to be able to deliver what it should. And Hamas, without the world, will also fail.
Absolutely. Daniel, you follow these things very closely, and you have some understanding of the different plans that are being floated, are being cooked up in different quarters. We saw recently from the Arab League summit a proposal for international UN trusteeship over the area. Probably a non-starter in my view, but at least it's being put forward as an idea. What do you think is the most realistic plans that we could imagine, the best case scenario for future governance?
There isn't one. And I don't spend too much of my time poring over the details of fantasies. That's why my emphasis is not to get dragged into this up to a point, and I'll come back to that, but I'll say, you know, I won't unpack the whole thing again because it would be real boring and repetitive. The incentive structure on the Israeli side, it always comes down to that, always comes down to what they can get away with. And it's really not that complicated, actually. Yes, there are plenty of things about this and about any issue that are complicated, but there's a fundamental here that's not that complicated. The caveats to that are, number one, people in Gaza need to be provided for, not least the situation of scorched earth and hellscape that has been created there. I think the reality will be that it will be a muddle through, that there will be aid agencies, UN agencies, others. I mean, what's this World Central Kitchen story, right? The people whose workers were killed in an Israeli strike. What's the story with that? That was in order to replace UNRWA, amongst other things. Jose Andreas is a Washington, do-gooder, fine. Great, well done. He was the most convenient guy. His setup was the most convenient setup the Israelis could possibly find. Friends of Israel put him up to this. He started his work in the region, providing for displaced Israelis from the October 7th attack, which isn't a bad thing, but just so we understand who this person is, what that setup was.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have the guts to turn around and say, Israel, you're fabricating this about UNRWA. We're not going along with you. We're not playing your games. And if you can't even do that, then really you're going to impose an international trusteeship? So I think we will muddle through. You create the best conditions for that, but you have to create the building blocks for something different, which isn't about funneling things back into, my mind isn't giving me an option but to say the word bullshit. So Nour said something really important, which was that the Western powers are willing to sacrifice the international system, and I'd add an already very fragile international system, to maintain Israeli exceptionalism. Look, it's hardly breaking news, hypocrisy, double standards. The thing about this moment, which you pointed to, Nour, is the inflationary cycle that we are in when it comes to the cost you have to pay for that. To run cover for something that is also not good for your security, not good for anyone, I would argue not good for Israeli Jews either. So the inflationary cost of running cover for this under the current circumstances is staggering. But if we have governments that are willing to do that, then the idea that you can make a decent plan out of things that are totally flawed, I don't think is plausible. And therefore, I think one has to keep the pressure up. But you also need Palestinians are going to have to seize leadership, seize agency. It's not going to be given to them as
leadership. You want me to go home or to go to prison?
I want you to go home, although it would be totally pleasant to have you stay in London. But yeah, that's.
No, I agree. We do need to seize agency.
So let's look ahead. And this will be my last question before opening to the audience. We've got an important ruling coming up from the International Court of Justice, which is expected next month, on the legality of the occupation. That could result in a moment where the world is saying this is illegal and there are consequences that flow from that. Is there a chance that we can break that exceptionalism? Is there a chance that, people will say, well, this doesn't really matter at the end of the day?
I think we are at a moment in history where there is a chance if we keep it up. And I would add to that even if this genocidal war ends tomorrow, collectively, we need to continue acting as if nothing has changed, because it wouldn't have changed, right? As Daniel was saying, what was happening before October 7th was also illegal and untenable and intolerable. So this is not just about this war, it's about the reality of keeping Palestinians captive in an illegal occupation. Countries like Spain and Ireland and Norway and Slovenia that have recently joined the majority of the world in recognizing Palestine have an opportunity to take the lead in translating that recognition into action, like Spain did today. Because recognition should also mean sanctions. It should also mean an arms embargo. It should mean accountability. If the occupation and maintaining this exceptionalism doesn't become costly, Israel will not feel the need to make a choice. In fact, it will be motivated to stay the course, because so far it's been a sweet deal.
Daniel, are we wrong to pin hopes on the significance of this ruling?
No, because those are really important pieces in the building blocks to challenging the impunity. The South African case, on which you weren't referring to, but on the contraventions of the Genocide Convention and the provisional measures, matter not because they can be enforced and not because the behavior changes the next day. Although, by the way, you now see the Israelis saying, we're opening an investigation into how the investigations won't go anywhere. But this is exposing vulnerabilities. So it does matter. It gives you the basis from which to move on. 25 states and regional groupings in their submissions to the case you were referring to at the ICJ over the third-party responsibilities and consequences of prolonged occupation as an advisory opinion asked for by the UN General Assembly. 25 states and regional groupings referenced apartheid in their submissions after the reports of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and others and their work. And that matters. The mobilization that we're seeing is, I'd never heard of Kelani, and I might even be pronouncing her name wrong, but it's good. So there's someone who does. I had heard of Macklemore, but we're in a whole different space now in terms of what this mobilization, what this movement is capable of, because no, governments aren't going to immediately change their positions. But as citizens, we are voters. We are consumers. We choose which products to buy and not to buy. Interesting decisions have been made by Pret-a-Manger and others. We are sometimes union members. What do union workers in a given port decide what to unload and not unload if arms are passing through your port? You know, what happened in Glasgow a few nights ago, where a women's European football qualifying match between the Scottish and Israeli teams had to be played behind closed doors. That's significant because that disrupts sport. Sport is an ungoverned space. Stadiums are ungoverned spaces. And I'm not going to draw a one-to-one analogy with South Africa, but imposing sanctions on individual settlers, how does that impact the majority of Israelis? Do they lose something? Do they feel, oh, I've got to rethink this? If their sports teams if there were disruption caused in sport and they couldn't play, by the way, they're violating the rules of football's governing body by having teams in the settlements recognized as the state of Palestine that are allowed to participate in the Israeli league. But that's not going to be a decision that FIFA takes. That's going to be a decision that fans take by making this too costly to allow Israel to continue to participate. And then average Israelis will say, oh man, that's rubbish. God, those bloody Palestinians and they're bloody. But what about me? I want my football team. Mate, do we have to look at the Palestinian question differently? That's how you change how people think.
Right. Let's over to you. Friends, it's your turn. I'll take the gentleman over there right by the side, first of all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for thank you very much for very interesting talks. I've got a question of 16 words. Will the continuation of the war in the Middle East lead to a Trump presidency and therefore lead to a world where the politics of fascism reigns supreme? Thank you.
Answer.
Do one at a time? Or?
Yes, please. Sorry, I was distracted by this mic.
I think it could very well bring Trump, but that is on Biden. I'm not sure what will happen in November. I think a lot can happen, but I do fear that Trump's chances became significantly better because Biden chose his ideological leanings over the voting patterns and the demands of his constituency in the Democratic Party. He is disconnected from where his party is at. And I think that will be his legacy. What we will do with the Trump presidency, God help us all, I'm not sure. I would hope that the world doesn't deal with Trump this time around if he comes the way they did last time, which is to cower away and not challenge and just pray that they wouldn't be the subject of his wrath. Because if his policies aren't confronted, then we all stand to lose, as you said.
Daniel, do you want to add?
Look, apparently Biden has a different calculation, and apparently his number crunching shows something else. I don't know whether he feels that people are going to be swayed by him putting out a plan like he did last week. I don't think that will be the case. I think he has a read of American politics and of not getting on the wrong side of Israel inside American politics, which is anachronistic for a Democrat president. But yeah, we shall see.
Thanks. I recognize the gentleman in the blue sweater over there. Then I think the lady who also had a hand up also. Go ahead, please.
I was a member of the European Parliament for 15 years, and during that time, for a large part of it, chair of what was known as the Euro-Arab group. I am therefore steeped in frustration. But I want to look on the bright side on the basis of what you were saying about the possibility of elections taking place. Let's assume that there is a ceasefire which appears to be durable and an independent body is agreed to control those elections. Is there a realistic hope that it could produce the kind of election that we could in any way recognize? In other words, a limited number of political parties organized in a way that they could hold a campaign, and at the end of it, that there would be 2 or 3 groups maybe that could form a coalition that could actually manage the situation from that point on?
I think you'll have more than 2 or 3 groups.
Perhaps I might just add, would Hamas dominate?
Yeah, I was waiting for that. Hamas, I think, will have a considerable portion, but they will not have a supermajority. I don't think. It all depends on when and how elections are held. We have a very robust elections commission that has been recognized as independent and able to carry out and monitor elections independently and fairly. And this is why we got the wrong results in 2006 and got sanctioned for them by electing Hamas. But I do think that if we get to elections, you will see a parliament that needs to work together in order to form a government. You will not have a supermajority for anybody or even a simple majority. But more importantly, elections shouldn't be limited to the PA. Elections should be part of a pathway to rebuild the PLO. And the Legislative Council of the PA is part of the PLO's legislature. So what we would hold, the elections we would hold in the OPT would be part of a process to reimagine, redesign, redefine our liberation movement, our sole and legitimate representative as a people, wherever we may be, our collective home, if you will, politically. But that starts with consensus, because we also can't hold elections everywhere. Some countries are a bit allergic to the word elections and the concept of elections where there is a large Palestinian constituency in the region. So we would have to figure a way out to ensure representation. But certainly, you would have a very vibrant, I think, political scene.
I have a follow-up to that. Do we need to wait for President Abbas to leave the scene politically before there can be a genuine revival of Palestinian democracy?
Well, I don't want to have an opinion on what God decides, but I think that currently, and given all the vetoes that we talked about, it is difficult for me to imagine a situation where the president would lead that process. I think he is more comfortable with the status quo despite its dysfunctional attributes. And it's been made comfortable by countries that support the status quo in the West and in the region, unfortunately.
Thanks. Time for one lady here, please, at the front. There's a microphone coming to you.
Thank you very much for absolutely fascinating presentations. First of all, I'd like to say I agree with the anger about the so-called maritime corridor. Could not agree more with you. And I also agree with that change is through changing of hearts and minds of citizens. What does that say about the potential timing of an end to this tragedy? Because changing hearts and minds takes time.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that only public or public opinion will end this genocidal war. This genocidal war needs to end by a political decision, right? And so a lot of actors are involved. In Arabic, we have a saying, when you have too many cooks, usually the food burns. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, we do have too many cooks right now, and they all need to be involved. I think the tragically weakened component of that is the Palestinian component, where you don't have Palestinians setting the agenda. But even without that, I think a lot can be said and done from governments that want to be set apart from those failed policies in order to make sure that not only does the killing stop, but that it stops in a politically sustainable and correct manner. Because I think the most catastrophic outcome to this tragedy would be if the US is allowed to say, we're back to October 6th and everything is fine. I think that's the danger we should all try to avoid or defeat.
Thanks. Daniel, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the immediate tragedy, which is what's going on every day in Gaza specifically, has one pathway, and the broader question of Palestinian dispossession and denial of rights and freedoms and achieving those, and therefore having a prospect of security for Palestinians and Israelis alike. That's a different track, essentially, right? So if we're talking about the first one, I think that the fast track to that, to me, has been clear for some time, which is that America would have to use its leverage with Israel. It conspicuously refuses to do so, and therefore it's 8 months and counting. But yeah, I think that there are other things going on which are going to influence the next phases. One is, okay, Rafah, horrendous. Now what? Now, it was, well, if we take out the last 4 battalions, then the war is won. I think one of the staggering things for Israelis, I think there's an additional element of shock for Israelis, not just of October 7th, but of how the deep systemic dysfunctionality of their system has been exposed subsequently, not just in its cruelty, but also in its failings. The resilience of Hamas on the ground, the inability to free hostages, take out leaders. When you destroy everything, it means you weren't capable of actually getting the targets you claim matter. Add to that what's going on in the north of Israel. On fire, people displaced. So what we're actually seeing is a quite significant shift that we pretend to ignore of the balance of forces on the battlefield, and therefore the balance of power. Also, what happened in the exchange with Iran. So all of this is a humiliation that Israel has never experienced. which is why the Israeli military is probably most of the leadership of that military is now the most significant lobby for a ceasefire, because they are stretched, they are exhausted, they are running out of manpower, reservists aren't showing up, they're cutting short, and a number of Israelis at 18 don't go straight into the military. These are approved programs with the military that they do for a year, like something called the Hesder Yeshiva, which I won't go into. They're cutting off those programs. They're saying we need these 18-year-olds in basic training now, so we can be sending them in a few weeks' time. Israel hasn't experienced massive fatalities, but what has gone on is, if this were the UK or the US in Iraq or Afghanistan, the time for medical evacuation of injured to substandard medical facilities means people would have died. In Israel, they're straight out to top hospitals. But that means people that have life-changing injuries on the Israeli side as well. What I'm painting is a picture that many inside the Israeli system know is not working and they want to bring an end to, but that doesn't align with Netanyahu's calculation. But eventually we're going, if the absence of leverage continues, what you will have is a different phase. A phase in which there will be less intensity, there won't be new areas to invade, and I think that will make it easier to get more of the humanitarian stuff in. I'm not painting a happy picture. I'm just this is the two realistic tracks are
Minnesota light.
Yeah.
We're going to have to stop in a minute, but I'm going to give one final quick question, I hope, down. Could give the microphone over in the middle, please. The gentleman in the middle. We are running a little bit over for this panel.
Thank you, Nour and Daniel. It's been sad but wonderful to listen to. The Palestinian population within Israel have been largely silenced.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering, they do have a vote. Is there any way that they can play a part in shaping this narrative into the future by organizing themselves better?
I think they can have a role in making sure that they are a formidable bloc, but they can never be part of mainstream Israeli politics, because mainstream Israeli politics negates them, their history, and why they're Israeli citizens to begin with. That conversation of why are there Palestinians in Israel and who are they and what is their relation with the state, I think has yet to be had and cannot be had, I think, in current circumstances. And so my best hope is to see something like the Joint Arab List that we saw a few years back that had 15 votes, that was a bloc that people can count on. But they can never be part of mainstream Israeli politics, because Israel is not a state for all its citizens. It defines itself otherwise.
Thanks very much to Nour and Daniel.